And leaders of the public benefits organization are this morning holding a summit to deliberate on the changing sectoral context. The conference, which is a follow-up to the FAST summit held in September 2016, is expected to bring together 400 senior representatives of civil society organizations, both local and international. The main objective of this summit is to bring together stakeholders to be updated on changes to policy environment and also a discussion on collective strategies. It is also expected to discuss the continued unwillingness to operationalize the PBO Act 2013. All right, and so I want us to have a conversation here. In studio, joining me right now is Regina Opondo. She is the Executive Secretary of CRECO, which is the Constitution and Reform Education Consortium. Thank you so much for joining us on News Center. Yes.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning to you.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this summit in a nutshell. We've had very complicated words there, but then in a nutshell, what is this summit all about?
Well, the summit brings together, as you said, civil society leaders from across the board, so from county level to international organizations that are working in Kenya, in all our diversity, so those of us working on human rights, those who are providing HIV care, those who are working on water, agriculture, etc. And the idea is that sometimes we need to come together and figure out if we are on the right track, but also have a discussion around the environment in which we're trying to do the work that we do.
Okay.
And we know the environment is not very friendly for public benefit organizations right now. It's actually hostile, which it makes it difficult for us to deliver the services we want to deliver for Kenyans, or the work we want to do with Kenyans. So the summit is to get an update since the last summit on what the environment has been like. And actually, if I gave you the highlights of what's happened in the last 3 months, you would see some of that hostility coming out.
Yeah, I mean, we want to hear about the hostility. But before then, let's talk about the agenda. Like you said, okay, fine, you are going to be updating each other on the works that you've been doing. But what else are you setting? What agenda are you setting, especially for this year being an election year?
I think we are reaffirming our commitment to our objective of working with Kenyans to ensure that Kenyans achieve what they want to achieve as Kenyans. So for those of us working on issues of civic education, which has now become a dirty word, we will be doing civic education.
Dirty word?
Yes. As of 12th December last year, it has become a dirty word. But it should not be a dirty word, because it provides space for a conversation as Kenyans on what are our priorities, what are our civic duties and civic responsibilities. If you take something as simple as voter registration now, week in, week out, IEBC is complaining about the low numbers. Kenyans are not interested in registering to vote, and eventually are not going to be interested in voting because they don't think voting changes their lives. Now we need to have a conversation about why they're not interested. So maybe they're not seeing these changes that voting could bring to their lives, or their leaders could bring to their lives. Okay. So then we can get into a conversation about not just the hows, how you tick, the voter, voter education and how you tick the box. Which is also important because last time, if you remember the last election, the number 3 candidate, I think overall, was spoiled votes.
Spoiled votes.
And it was not because people were protesting, it's probably they didn't know how to tick the boxes. Okay. But to take that conversation a little bit further as to what is your responsibility as a citizen, why is voting important, why is voting for good leaders important, what do good leaders look like, what should you expect of your leaders? And all that is provided for in things like the Constitution. But in the Constitution, it remains complicated and abstract. Okay. So you need people who can have that conversations with citizens in the language that they understand.
That they understand.
Yes.
Let's talk about the work that the civil society put in last year. And I remember having very many conversations, and especially that time that we were having all these corruption scandals being unveiled left, right, center. And there were critics that who were saying that the civil society did not really come out really strongly to speak about this. Fine, we had the protests and we saw them, but it was not enough. There was no agitation as expected from civil society. And
mine would be, what is the expectation from civil society? So when you take an issue
maybe continuous agitation every single day, I don't know, consistency maybe.
And that actually, my challenge usually is that should be the role of each and every one of us. Okay. So the understanding of civil society, I think, poses a problem. And civil society, loosely put, is that space between government and the family, which is where all of us reside. So anytime we organize ourselves around an issue, then we become civil society. but people have started to see that the more
like
prominent activists, those are the, that's civil society, whereas it's the media, it's the academics, it's the faith-based groups. As long as we organize around an issue, whether it is we don't have water, we organize to dig a borehole, then we are civil society.
Okay.
So that is the kind of agitation that we should continuously see. And I agree with you, it should be continuous. But we're also operating in a very dynamic environment with a lot of distractions.
Right.
Part of this hostility causes that distraction. So for many organizations, like you've heard recently, the KHRC, facing a lot of challenges from the NGO board. Now, the KHRC is one of those organizations that would be at the forefront of doing this work. But sometimes they have to stop and start dealing with the NGO board, their, allegations of mismanagement of money, etc. And many organizations are dealing with that, even at county level. We're getting reports of county-based organizations having to face harassment, either from county commissioners, from chiefs, even from, county governments themselves. So that distracts you from your daily work of agitating.
Okay.
That is one. Number two, despite the, there's the advocacy work that you can do around it, but when it comes to an issue like corruption, civil society cannot prosecute. Civil society cannot collect evidence.
Right.
Civil society cannot, try the case in court. So there are things, but civil society should be there to push the agencies responsible for those bits of work to do their work, which they continue to do. And they do that at the forefront. So whether it is protests like in that picture, or at the back where it is meetings, pushing for policy, pushing for the laws, doing that pushing. Yeah. But some of that work also gets you in trouble. So part of the challenges we've had is that where we get frustrated that everything else is not working, some organizations or some individuals then take recourse in the courts through public interest litigation.
Yes.
So the cases that people like Okiya Omtata are always pushing in interest of the public, around stolen monies. And we are seeing more citizens who are not necessarily civil society also starting to do that, which for me is great because I think everybody should consider themselves a civil society actor. So in those cases, then you get punished. I mean, part of some organizations, because of that, they've been in the limelight, and so they've had NGO board knocking at their door.
Yes.
Or KRA knocking at their door.
Trying to just harass them or something. So you mentioned that there are a number of hostilities, and you've mentioned just a couple of them here. But how has that made your work harder, and how are you going to deal with it? Because at the end of the day, we need a strong civil society in the country so that other Kenyans can get on board.
Yes, and I agree with you. And I think the main message of the summit today should be that we are not victims and we are not going to be victims. Civil society in Kenya is very resilient. We survived as the Mau Mau as early as then, in the 1950s, the Mekatililis. So that was civil society. And continuously that comes up. And we survived the 1990s, the Moi era. So we're also going to survive this era. So we're not going to be victims. We're going to be here. And I think we are committed to continuing to work with Kenyans for Kenyans. But some of the challenges that we have faced and how that affects our work. So I've talked about the distractions. It means instead of, like, for example, my organization, CRECO, does civic education, works with other civil society organizations to help them deliver on that. It means if I'm facing these challenges, then I have to pool all resources, or I do not have the resources. I have to stop, sort out this other business, and then come back to the work. So it causes that kind of a distraction. Number two, it has security implications because we've also seen the public being mobilized against the sector. And this is the public that you're trying to work with and work for. So if you face hostility from the public, it makes your work that much harder as well. And the issues become politicized. So instead of discussing issues, we are discussing the politics of whoever is pushing these issues rather than actual issues. And money.
Money?
Money is a problem.
But civil society, you guys have all the money because you get support from all over the world.
Which all over the world? I wish we had the funding.
Really?
Because then I would understand maybe why government is so threatened. But we are struggling for resources, and several organizations have shut down in the last 5 years. Kenya is deemed to be doing pretty well as a middle-income country, so apparently we don't have that many problems.
So our civil society is doing well financially?
No, civil society is not doing. I'm saying Kenya as a country is doing well.
Kenya as a country.
So there's less reason to invest in Kenya, at least in the civil society side. And so the move is towards trade and development, working with state, working with businesses, etc. So resources are a challenge actually for civil society at this time. What is the other thing I wanted to say?
Okay, as you remember that, let's talk about the PBO Act 2013, the unwillingness, quote unquote, to operationalize it. So first of all, talk to us about what is this act all about?
Okay. So the PBO Act, Public Benefits Organization Act of 2013, is a law that was put together by both civil society and government. It was a very consultative process, including talking to organizations and citizens at county level, you know, at the grassroots, and at very high level, but also looking at international best practice. And we even drafted the law together. And the law was passed in 2012 and signed into law by Kibaki in 2013 January. But to date, it is still sitting on the shelves. So the law in operation is the NGO Act and any other formation that exists. The PBO Act was quite progressive in that it envisioned civil society as a partner of government. Because government, our government as it is now is not able to deliver on all services, civil society is able to bridge that gap. And that's the gap I'm talking about between the state and, of course, the family. It was also providing for greater accountability from the sector. We often hear people accusing the sector of not being accountable, having money, as you talked about, having lots of money, which doesn't go to the actual work it's supposed to do. So it was strengthening the accountability. We already have accountability in terms of other laws around, you know, tax, etc. But this it would have improved that accountability, not just of money, but also of the work that we do. Accountability to donors, accountability to government, but most importantly, accountability to citizens, so that citizens actually know what you're doing and they can explain what you're doing and they understand why you're there. It also created frameworks for government and civil society collaboration, working jointly, whether it is on policy, but also envisioning a future where government would fund civil society, so that we also reduce this narrative. Is that a possibility, by the way? It is a possibility with the right government and with goodwill. It is a possibility. It happens in other countries, so it is a possibility. It's happened before and I think it happens to a certain extent. So I've had some county governments working with local organizations to do civic education, which is actually a government mandate, so it shouldn't be a dirty word. So it works at certain levels. We had the program KNICE, the Kenya National Integrated Civic Education Program, which was run by the Ministry of Justice, I think up until 2012. And that worked with civil society in designing the program and implementing the program. All right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So this summit, I mean, at the end of how long is it going to take? And finally, after everything is said, because, you know, these summits happen all the time in this country, but then after this summit, what is going to be the end game? Okay. After the summit, we hope to come out of this re-energized. We've also had a lot of bad energy, I think, the last couple of months. And there's a feeling of loss of morale. So we hope to come out of this energized and ready to do the work that we need to do. That is number one. Number two, to remind, I think, those that are doubting that civil society is alive, that civil society is alive, is working, and is present. Three, to also have, I think, more resolve on action around getting the PBO Act operationalized this year. We can't be talking about the PBO Act for 5 years. So getting that in action, but also preparing our strategy of continuing our work despite the challenges, so that we remain resilient, we remain visible, we remain active. Motivated and active. We'll have that strategy specifically for the sector, but also we've adopted in the last summit a broader strategy around civic space, and recognizing that is a problem not just for our sector, but for the media and for anybody else working in that space. And we developed a strategy last year which was approved, so giving updates on what has been done with regards to that strategy and getting more people to adopt the strategy and to roll it out. All right. Sounds really heavy. All the best with that. Thank you. Regina Opondo, she is the Executive Secretary of CRECO, which is the Constitution and Reform Education Consortium. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. All right.